Hello everyone, and welcome back to Invisible Legends Reimagined. Today we want to take an in-depth look at a very ominous question facing America. With Donald Trump gearing up for a potential 2024 presidential bid, is the US drifting towards a second civil war? This might sound initially alarming or even overblown. But looking soberly at the political and social trends in America, combined with Trump's enduring popularity on the far right, it's a possibility we must grapple with. The shocking events of January 6, 2021 lent sudden credence to long-simmering fears about political violence and domestic conflict. And Trump's post-presidency actions suggest our divisions are not healing, but worsening. Some voices argue we're already witnessing the opening sparks of a low-level civil war driven by racism, religious extremism, and the erosion of democratic norms. Domestic security experts point to ongoing threats against election administrators, attacks meant to disrupt LGBTQ events nationwide, and the proliferation of armed protests as early flares that could easily escalate into an inferno. The violent rhetoric and dehumanization prevalent on the far right also alarm experts. When political opponents are branded as demons rather than fellow citizens who deserve dialogue, the basic prerequisites for democracy crumble away. These experts see the disturbing rise of militant Christian nationalism as another warning sign. Groups who increasingly argue that violence is justified, even ordained by God, to resist social change and achieve their vision of a theocratic America. Of course, other voices contend these dire predictions of imminent domestic conflict are greatly premature or exaggerated. The events of January 6th were a national disgrace, they argue, but in the 2 years since, resilience has been the dominant theme. Day-to-day political life and governing institutions have weathered the Trumpian storm. 2022 saw record voter turnout for midterm elections, undermining notions that election integrity is broadly threatened. There quite simply isn't any evidence of organized armed groups truly ready and capable to take up arms against the government or threaten citizens' safety. These commentators accuse some on the left of irresponsibly fear-mongering about fascism or civil war, in ways that only stoke societal tensions without reflecting reality on the ground. They warn that overreactions rooted in partisan panic rather than facts could fuel their own dangerous policy overreach, from censorship to mass surveillance enacted in the name of narrowly combating specific groups. As with many complex truths about America's unfolding story, the reality of potential domestic conflict likely lies somewhere between these extremes. On one hand, it can be easy to underestimate the resilience and moral character of the American experiment. This is a nation that has weathered intense internal polarization, injustice, and even violence before without fracturing irreparably. The abolitionist and civil rights movements transformed society through courageous resistance, not insurrection. America's very identity is bound up with reinvention, progress, and reconciliation. Creativity, optimism, and inclusive patriotism could very well triumph over tribal hatred in the years ahead. But it would be dangerously naive to entirely dismiss worrisome trends either. Racism and religious extremism have proven their ability to utterly harden divides throughout history across societies. Today, virulent hatred of groups like transgender Americans, critical race theory, or reproductive rights provides powerful political wedge issues for ambitious demagogues to stoke anger and resentment. A shrewd celebrity figurehead like Donald Trump, combined with a sudden catalyst event like an economic crisis, natural disaster, or foreign attack, cannot be reasonably discounted as a force that could unleash unprecedented turmoil. What warning signs suggest the unthinkable could emerge sooner than we hope? Many perceptive voices argue we've been locked into a slow-motion civil war for years now, driven by the enduring legacy of racism and the distortion of populist Christianity. Obama's presidency itself surfaced long-buried divisions rooted in white Christian nationalism and racial resentment. Donald Trump expertly weaponized these currents, casting himself as the anointed warrior savior against sinister forces like Black Lives Matter, migrant caravans, or Silicon Valley elites, supposedly threatening the real America. January 6th was not an anomaly, but the culmination of extremist passions he had deliberately inflamed for half a decade. The refusal by tens of millions of Republican voters to ever acknowledge Trump's defeat keeps this dangerous movement alive. Perhaps even more alarming are concrete warning signs. The little fires slowly smoldering, rather than any one national inferno we can point to yet. The wave, since 2017, of incidents targeting institutions and communities continues. In 2020 and 2022, far-right instigators added a new weapon to their playbook: systematic, coordinated, and widespread threats and harassment of election workers and volunteer poll watchers that could severely undermine electoral integrity in 2024. Mainstream Republican rhetoric about civil war and hanging disloyal officials normalizes the threats. Overt displays of racism are surging nationwide, from hoods on college campuses to public white supremacist marches. White nationalist and militia-style groups, from the Proud Boys to the Patriot Front to the Boogaloo movement, seem increasingly visible and assertive in the public squares of Michigan to Idaho to Virginia, echoing long-standing fears about radicalized veterans and gun enthusiasts inclined towards violent resistance. Taken together, these disturbing incidents suggest that militant fringes grow emboldened by a climate of impunity and a belief that extraordinary action must be taken to resist social change before time runs out. These nightmare scenarios remain blessedly unthinkable for now. But human nature has not changed, and we forget at our peril that democracy relies upon public virtues, institutions, and norms that can frighteningly erode when conditions are ripe. The allure of scorched earth politics seems dependent now upon individual leadership choices rather than collective institutions, cultural safeguards, or constitutionally enshrined stability. Trump's indictment has further inflamed rhetoric about the need for force, even civil war, to save freedom. When political loyalties exceed commitment to democracy itself, the future grows far more precarious. Critics counter that liberal Americans have cried wolf about imminent fascism or conflict too often since 2015 for current warnings to retain credibility. An April 2024 Hollywood film entitled Civil War tells the story of a team of journalists traveling across the United States during a rapidly escalating civil war that has engulfed the entire nation. Critics argue that this movie is nothing more than a partisan fantasy, completely detached from reality and day-to-day political and social conditions. Across most of America on a daily basis, institutions endure, communities thrive, and conflict remains isolated and fringe. Warnings about rising fascism, they say, dangerously conflate isolated incidents with society-wide indicators, failing to offer vital nuance, context, or solutions that meet this polarized era thoughtfully. These skeptical voices surely raise important cautions about responsible leadership and clear-eyed policymaking rooted in wisdom, not reactionary alarm about worst-case scenarios. Yet the past half-decade has also provided ample illustration that complacency about extremism when millions embrace fundamentally anti-democratic visions could prove catastrophic as well. The path ahead promises great peril, but also freedom and an opportunity to create a country stronger and more united if citizens choose to embrace it. I hope you found this breakdown of perspectives on the possible return of a Donald Trump presidency and the potential for catastrophic civil conflict insightful. Please subscribe for more analysis of these pivotal questions facing our nation and world. America remains an extraordinary promise, but its destiny shall be determined by whether citizens summon moral vision to navigate the present darkness. Please check out this next video about a battle in a similar time between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Until the next episode,